The rancher gave his last loaf of bread to an Apache woman, and the chief returned with an army of women. The sun was slowly dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty, quiet land. The small ranch sat on the edge of the frontier, surrounded by miles of open plains and rugged hills. There were no neighbors nearby, only the endless stretch of wild land that seemed both beautiful and lonely at the same time. The rancher, a tall, sturdy man with rough hands and a gentle heart, walked along the edge of his property, checking the fences and watching over the few animals he had. Life on the ranch was simple, but it had taught him to be resilient. Every day brought challenges, from harsh weather to the unpredictable behavior of the animals, and sometimes he wondered if it was worth it to live so far from the comforts of a town. That evening, the rancher noticed the sky turning a deeper shade of red, and a cold wind began to sweep across the plains. He hurried back to his small cabin, hoping to start a fire before nightfall. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and fresh bread. Bread was a rare treat for him, as food was often scarce in those remote parts. He had baked a single loaf that afternoon, carefully measuring each ingredient, knowing that it might have to last for several days. The bread was golden brown, crisp on the outside and soft on the inside. He set it on the small table, feeling a quiet pride in the small victory of making something good in a life that was often hard. As he began to settle down for the evening, he heard a faint noise outside the door. At first, he thought it was just the wind rustling through the dry grass. But then he heard it again, a soft shuffle, almost like someone dragging their feet. He went to the door and cautiously opened it, peering into the growing darkness. There, standing under the dim light of the setting sun, was a woman. She looked tired and weak, her clothes worn and torn from travel. Her hair was tangled and her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength. She did not speak at first, only looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. The rancher felt a sudden rush of empathy. He could see that she had been through a lot, and despite knowing that he had very little to give, he could not turn her away. He invited her inside, offering her a seat by the fire. She hesitated at first but then stepped in, her movements careful and deliberate. The warmth of the cabin seemed to reach her, and for a moment she let out a sigh, as if she had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. The rancher looked at the loaf of bread on the table. He knew that he only had enough food for himself for the next day or two. Giving her the bread would mean going hungry, at least for a little while. But something inside him told him that this was the right thing to do. Without a word, he broke the loaf in half and handed it to her. The woman's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. She took the bread gently, almost as if it were the most precious thing in the world. As she ate, the rancher watched her carefully. She was quiet, and her movements were slow and deliberate, as if she were savoring every bite. He noticed the calluses on her hands and the dirt under her fingernails, signs of a hard life lived in the wilderness. He realized that this woman, though weary, had survived many hardships and had a strength that he could only admire. After she finished the bread, she looked up at him and whispered a few words in a language he did not understand. Her tone, however, was gentle and filled with gratitude. The rancher smiled and nodded, letting her know that she was welcome. He offered her some water, which she drank eagerly, and then he gestured toward a corner of the cabin where she could rest. She thanked him again with a slight bow and lay down carefully, curling herself up to conserve warmth. The night grew darker, and the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small cabin. The rancher could not sleep, his mind busy with thoughts about the woman he had helped. He wondered who she was, why she had been wandering alone, and if she had family or friends waiting for her somewhere. He felt a mixture of concern and curiosity. Despite the danger that sometimes came from strangers in the wild, he had chosen to act with kindness. And though he could not know it at the time, This small act of generosity would set in motion events that would change his life forever. As the hours passed, he heard the soft sound of her breathing and realized that she had fallen asleep. He watched her for a while, feeling a deep sense of connection with someone he barely knew. The loneliness of the ranch, which he had felt every day, seemed to lessen slightly in her presence. There was something comforting about sharing the space with another human being, even if only for a brief moment. Morning came slowly, with the first rays of sunlight spilling into the cabin. The woman awoke and looked around, still cautious but calm. She offered a small smile to the rancher, a silent acknowledgement of the kindness he had shown. He responded with a nod and a smile of his own, feeling that the world was a little brighter because of this simple act. Before leaving, she gave him a small token, a piece of cloth with a simple design, a gesture of thanks that spoke louder than words. The rancher accepted it humbly, understanding that true gratitude could not always be expressed in language. When she stepped back into the wilderness, he watched her disappear into the tall grass, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The rancher returned to his work, but the memory of the woman stayed with him. He thought about how easy it would have been to ignore her, to protect his own needs and possessions. Yet, in choosing to give, he had not only helped someone in need but also opened the door to an unexpected chapter of his life. The land felt different somehow, as if the act of kindness had left an invisible mark on the world around him. Days later, he would still find himself looking toward the horizon, wondering if the woman was safe, if she had found her way home, and if the story of that night would somehow come back to him. Deep down, he sensed that life had a way of returning favors, often in ways one could not predict. And while he continued his routine on the ranch, the memory of giving away his last loaf of bread remained a reminder that compassion, even in the smallest form, could have a profound impact. After that evening, life on the ranch returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The rancher moved through his days with the usual routines, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending to the small garden. But he could not shake the memory of the woman he had helped. He found himself glancing toward the horizon more often, imagining her walking through the tall grass, safe and strong. Her presence had left an unexpected mark on him. The memory of her grateful eyes and gentle voice lingered, reminding him that even in the harshness of frontier life, acts of kindness could carry great meaning. The neighbors in the nearby town were a short ride away, though the journey required careful navigation through open plains and winding paths. From time to time, the rancher would visit the town for supplies. Each visit was a reminder of the world beyond his lonely property. The townspeople knew him as a quiet man, honest and dependable, but also someone who preferred solitude. He seldom talked about the world outside the ranch or the people he had encountered. Yet now, he found himself thinking about the Apache woman whenever he visited the market or the general store. Word traveled slowly in those times, and the rancher began hearing whispers from travelers passing through. Some spoke of Apache bands moving across the land, raiding settlements, or hunting for resources. These stories often carried a tone of fear and suspicion. The rancher had heard such tales before, but now, after his encounter, they felt more personal. Each story made him reflect on the woman he had helped and the risks she might face. He wondered whether she belonged to one of these groups and if she was now safely back with her family. Even with these concerns, the rancher carried on with his work, understanding that worry alone could not change what had happened. Each day required attention to the animals, the fences, and the garden. The horses needed grooming, the cows needed milking, and the fields required constant care. He would rise at dawn, his body aching from the effort, yet he never regretted his decision to give away his last loaf of bread. In his mind, it had been the right thing to do, a simple gesture of humanity in a world that often demanded harshness. But the quiet life of the rancher was slowly interrupted by subtle signs that something unusual was unfolding. Late at night, he would hear distant sounds, faint and rhythmic, almost like a drumbeat carried on the wind. Sometimes he noticed shadows moving in the distance, just beyond the reach of his lantern. At first, he felt a surge of fear. Living on the edge of the frontier meant constant awareness of danger. Many settlers spoke of raids and attacks by unknown groups, and the idea of strangers approaching was never taken lightly. Yet, as days passed, he realized that these signs did not feel threatening. The sounds and shadows seemed deliberate but not hostile, almost like a message carried silently through the land. The rancher began to understand that life was often more complex than it appeared. People, and even entire communities, could not be judged by rumors or fear alone. He thought of the woman he had helped, the quiet strength she had displayed and the gratitude in her eyes. Perhaps, he reflected, not all encounters with strangers had to bring danger. Some could bring understanding, friendship, or even protection. The more he pondered these ideas, the more he felt a quiet anticipation building in the air, though he could not explain why. One evening, a group of travelers passed near his ranch, and he caught snippets of their conversation. They spoke of an unusual story. A woman from an Apache community had been helped by a kind-hearted settler, and the chief had promised that the act of kindness would not be forgotten. The rancher listened carefully, curious and slightly unsettled. Could this story be about him? The timing and details matched what he remembered. A mixture of relief and cautious excitement filled him. For the first time, he felt that his decision might ripple far beyond the small cabin he called home. The next few days were filled with a mixture of anticipation and routine. The rancher continued his daily work, yet he found himself imagining what might happen next. Would the woman return? Would her family come? And if they did, would they bring danger or gratitude? These questions occupied his mind, yet he tried to focus on the practical tasks at hand. The cows needed milking, the fences needed repair, and the small garden required careful attention. He worked tirelessly, knowing that life on the ranch would continue regardless of what might unfold. During this time, he also reflected on the nature of gratitude and human connection. He realized that small acts of kindness could leave a lasting impact, often in ways that could not be immediately seen. Helping someone in need, he thought, was not only about the moment, it was about trust, honor, and the potential for a future built on respect. He remembered the way the woman had looked at him, her eyes shining with quiet appreciation, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a feeling that no amount of wealth or success could ever provide. The rancher's thoughts were interrupted one night by a sudden noise outside the cabin. At first, it seemed like the wind, but then he heard it more clearly. The sound of movement in the grass, footsteps careful and deliberate. He grabbed a lantern and stepped outside, scanning the horizon. The moon cast a pale glow across the plains, illuminating the tall grass and the uneven ground. His heart raced as he tried to discern whether the sounds were friend or foe. Yet as he waited and listened, he noticed a pattern, a rhythm in the movement, almost like a silent signal. He realized that this was no ordinary traveler. These were people who knew the land and moved with purpose. Over the next few days, the signs continued. Footprints appeared near the edge of his property, careful and unobtrusive. Occasionally, he saw shadows moving just beyond the hills, watching, waiting, but never approaching directly. The rancher began to feel a mixture of curiosity and reassurance. He remembered the woman's gentle gratitude and wondered if these signs were connected to her. Perhaps her family had come to ensure she was safe or to show their appreciation. The idea filled him with a sense of wonder, as if life had a mysterious way of returning kindness in unexpected forms. As the tension in the air grew, the rancher also found himself reflecting on his own place in the world. He lived a life of solitude, shaped by the land and the animals he cared for, yet he realized that human connection, even brief and unexpected, was what made life meaningful. The woman's presence, though fleeting, had reminded him that compassion could transcend fear, cultural differences, and distance. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that his actions, even small ones, could influence the lives of others in ways he might never fully see. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink, the rancher noticed something extraordinary. In the distance, a figure appeared on the horizon. At first, it was just a small silhouette, barely visible against the hills. But as it moved closer, he realized that it was a woman, the same woman he had helped days ago. She walked with a confidence and grace that spoke of strength and survival. Behind her, more figures appeared, moving carefully and silently across the plains. The rancher's heart pounded with anticipation. He could not know what would happen next, but he sensed that the story was about to unfold in ways he could not imagine. The rancher watched as the figures approached, their movements deliberate yet peaceful. It was clear that they were not a threat, but rather a presence meant to honor something deeper than fear or violence. As they drew closer, the rancher felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and nervousness. He understood that the simple act of giving his last loaf of bread had created a bond that reached far beyond the small cabin on the edge of the frontier. This bond was built on respect, trust, and the quiet power of kindness, a bond that would soon reveal its true strength. The day began like any other on the ranch, with the sun rising slowly over the horizon and casting a warm golden light across the fields. The rancher moved through his morning routines, feeding the animals and checking the fences, though his mind was restless. For days he had noticed signs that something unusual was approaching, yet he could not predict what form it would take. Every shadow, every distant sound made him alert. He knew that life on the frontier could be unpredictable, but this anticipation was different. It carried a sense of expectation, a feeling that what was coming would not be ordinary. By mid-morning, the rancher's curiosity turned into cautious excitement. A faint cloud of dust appeared in the distance, rising from the dry earth and moving steadily toward his property. At first he thought it might be travelers passing by, but as the shapes became clearer, he realized that this was something far greater. Dozens of figures were moving across the plains, their steps synchronized, deliberate and careful. They were not approaching like a threat, but with a presence that demanded attention and respect. The rancher grabbed his lantern and stepped out into the open air, squinting against the bright sunlight. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to understand what he was witnessing. Among the figures, he recognized the woman he had helped. She walked confidently at the front, her posture strong and determined, yet her eyes carried the same quiet gratitude he remembered. Behind her, more figures emerged, women, moving with precision and purpose. They were not armed in the way he had expected from stories of raids and conflict. Instead, their movements were calm, dignified, and almost ceremonial. As they drew closer, the rancher noticed a man at the front of the group, tall and commanding. His presence was powerful yet composed, radiating authority without aggression. This was the chief, the leader of the Apache community. His gaze met the rancher's, and there was a moment of silent recognition. The chief did not speak harsh words or demand anything. Instead, he nodded slightly, acknowledging the act of kindness that had brought them all here. The rancher felt a mix of awe and relief. This was not a raid, not a confrontation. It was an expression of gratitude, a gesture that transcended the boundaries of culture and circumstance. The women approached the cabin first, their movements careful so as not to disturb the animals or the property. They carried no weapons and spoke softly among themselves in their language, yet their presence filled the ranch with energy and purpose. The woman the rancher had helped stepped forward and translated for the others. She explained that the chief had sent them to honor him for his generosity, to show that kindness could be returned in ways beyond expectation. The rancher felt a lump form in his throat. He had acted out of instinct, giving the last loaf of bread to someone in need, never imagining that it could lead to such a remarkable encounter. The chief stepped closer, his gaze steady and respectful. He spoke in careful English, learned from interactions with travelers and settlers over the years. "Your kindness has not gone unnoticed," he said. "In our community, we honor those who act with compassion. The woman you helped is my daughter. You have shown her care when she needed it most. For that, we come to show our gratitude." The rancher listened, his heart swelling with a mixture of humility and surprise. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that few could understand. In that moment, he realized that his small act had created a bridge between two very different worlds. The women began to settle near the ranch, moving with grace and purpose. They helped with chores, sharing knowledge of the land and its resources. Some tended to the animals, others helped repair fences or gather water. The rancher watched in amazement as they worked together, their cooperation and efficiency remarkable. He learned quickly that this was not only an expression of gratitude, but also an opportunity for exchange. The women shared stories of their community, their traditions, and the ways they thrived in harmony with the land. The rancher, in turn, shared what he knew about farming, animal care, and life in the settlement. As the day unfolded, a bond began to form. The rancher found himself asking questions, genuinely curious about the customs and experiences of these visitors. He listened as the women described their journey, their struggles, and the lessons they had learned in the wilderness. Each story revealed resilience, courage, and wisdom. He realized that he was learning not just about a different culture, but about life itself, lessons in patience, endurance, and the quiet power of respect. The presence of the chief was equally profound. He did not impose his authority but instead observed, guiding when necessary and offering insight when asked. The rancher noticed that the chief treated each woman with respect and consideration, embodying the values he spoke of. This was leadership that inspired loyalty and trust, not fear. The rancher felt a growing admiration for the chief, recognizing in him qualities he hoped to cultivate within himself. By evening, the rancher felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in years. The initial tension, the uncertainty, had given way to a feeling of connection and mutual respect. The women gathered around the cabin, sharing food and conversation, while the chief remained nearby, ensuring that everything was proceeding smoothly. The rancher joined them, offering what little he had prepared for his own meal. They accepted it graciously, and he realized that generosity was not measured by quantity, but by intention. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, the rancher reflected on the events of the day. He thought of the simple loaf of bread he had given, unaware that it would lead to this extraordinary encounter. He realized that kindness, even when small and seemingly insignificant, could ripple outward in ways beyond imagination. The bond formed between him and the Apache visitors was a testament to the enduring power of compassion. Night fell over the ranch, and the air was filled with the sounds of soft voices, laughter, and quiet conversation. The women shared stories by the fire, and the rancher listened, captivated by their wisdom and courage. He learned about their traditions, the challenges they faced, and the ways they supported each other as a community. These stories were not just entertainment, they were lessons in life, resilience, and humanity. The chief approached the rancher once more, speaking in a tone both firm and gentle. "You have shown that your heart is open," he said. "In our world, this is a rare gift. We honor you not only for what you have done for my daughter, but for what you represent: kindness, courage, and the willingness to see the humanity in others." The rancher nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and humility. He realized that he had learned as much from them as they had from him, and that the encounter had transformed not only his life, but also his understanding of the world. The night continued with a sense of quiet celebration. The women helped with the evening chores, ensuring the animals were fed and the cabin was secure. The rancher moved among them, feeling both awe and comfort. He understood that these visitors had come not to take, but to give, to honor, and to share. Their presence was a reminder that the world was larger than his small ranch, and that human connection could create harmony in even the most isolated places. As he lay down to sleep that night, the rancher thought about the journey ahead. He did not know how long the visitors would stay or what challenges might come, but he felt confident that the bonds formed today would endure. He reflected on the lessons of generosity, trust, and courage, understanding that life often rewarded those who acted with integrity and heart. And though he could not have imagined it when he broke that single loaf of bread, he now saw that one act of kindness could shape destinies, build bridges, and create a legacy of goodwill that would be remembered long after the moment had passed. After the arrival of the chief and the women, life on the ranch began to change in ways the rancher had never imagined. The quiet, solitary routines that had once filled his days were now shared with visitors who moved with purpose, grace, and kindness. The rancher had always been self-reliant, but he quickly realized that there was a strength in collaboration, in shared effort and mutual respect. Each day he woke with a sense of anticipation, eager to see what could be learned, shared, or accomplished alongside these remarkable guests. The women had settled into a rhythm of their own, moving seamlessly through the tasks of the ranch. Some tended to the animals, gently guiding the horses and cows with careful hands, showing patience the rancher had not known he could appreciate. Others helped in the garden, teaching him new techniques for planting, watering, and nurturing crops in ways that conserved resources and maximized growth. The rancher watched them with admiration, noticing how their movements were deliberate, yet light, and how every action seemed purposeful. He began to understand that this was not just about labor, it was a way of life, a philosophy built on respect for the land, for each other, and for the tasks at hand. Slowly, walls began to crumble, both literal and metaphorical. The rancher's cabin, once a symbol of solitude, now echoed with conversation, laughter, and the sounds of cooperation. The women shared stories of their culture, speaking of traditions passed down through generations. They described the ways their community survived the harshness of the wilderness, not through violence or fear, but through resourcefulness, courage, and unity. Each story captivated the rancher, opening his mind to perspectives he had never encountered before. He realized that survival was not only about endurance, but also about wisdom, understanding, and compassion. The rancher, in turn, began to share his own knowledge. He explained the patterns of the animals, the ways to manage crops in the changing seasons, and the tools that had helped him sustain his small homestead. The women listened intently, asking questions, offering suggestions, and even trying new techniques. This exchange of knowledge created a bond stronger than words alone could describe. Both parties learned, adapted, and grew, and a quiet trust began to form, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Evenings became a time of reflection and storytelling. Around the fire, the women would speak of their ancestors, of lessons learned from the land and from each other. They spoke of bravery, patience, and the importance of honor. The rancher, who had spent much of his life in isolation, felt a deep connection to these stories. He saw parallels in his own life, understanding that though his experiences were different, the values were universal. Courage, integrity, and kindness were not bound by culture. They were human traits, shared across the divides that so often separated communities. Over time, the rancher noticed subtle changes in the environment around him. The land seemed more alive, the animals calmer and more responsive, the garden thriving more than ever before. He realized that the presence of the women, their energy, and their care had transformed the ranch in ways that went beyond physical work. There was harmony in their coexistence, a balance between effort and respect, and the rancher began to see that this harmony could extend to all aspects of life if approached with patience and understanding. Trust deepened not only between the rancher and the women, but also between him and the chief. The chief did not demand loyalty or obedience. Instead, he guided with wisdom, offering insight when needed and observing with care. The rancher came to value these quiet moments of learning, understanding that leadership was not about authority alone, but about guidance, fairness, and the ability to inspire others. The chief's presence was a constant reminder that actions rooted in honor and respect could bridge worlds, heal misunderstandings, and build lasting relationships. One day, the rancher faced a challenge that tested the trust and cooperation that had been forming. A sudden storm swept across the plains, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and the threat of flooding. The animals grew restless, and the fences risked being damaged. The rancher, who had handled storms alone for many years, found himself overwhelmed. But the women responded immediately, working alongside him with determination and calm precision. Together, they secured the animals, reinforced the fences, and ensured that the garden and cabin were protected. The rancher realized that this experience was a lesson in teamwork, in the strength that could be found when individuals worked together toward a common goal. The storm passed, leaving behind not only clear skies but also a strengthened bond between all those at the ranch. As the days continued, the rancher began to notice subtle shifts in his own perspective. He had once viewed life on the frontier as a solitary struggle, measured by endurance and survival. Now he understood that life was richer when shared, when guided by empathy, collaboration, and the willingness to learn from others. The women had taught him to observe, to listen, and to approach challenges with creativity and patience. Their presence was a constant reminder that strength was not only physical, but also emotional, social, and spiritual. The community that was forming on the ranch extended beyond immediate work. The women helped create routines that encouraged balance, rest, and mindfulness. They taught methods of food preservation, herbal remedies, and ways to live in harmony with the changing seasons. The rancher absorbed these lessons, understanding that true sustainability required knowledge, care, and respect. Through these shared experiences, he came to see that generosity and gratitude were not merely gestures. They were ways of life that could guide behavior, relationships, and choices. The rancher also began to reflect on his own character, on the choices he had made throughout his life. He recognized that the simple act of giving his last loaf of bread had been more than an impulse. It had been a reflection of values he had always held, but perhaps not fully understood. By extending kindness without expectation, he had opened the door to a world of learning, trust, and mutual respect. This realization filled him with humility and pride, knowing that small, selfless acts could lead to profound and lasting change. Over the following weeks, bonds between the rancher and the women deepened further. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments, building a sense of family that transcended cultural boundaries. The women taught him about courage in the face of adversity, the importance of patience, and the strength found in community. The rancher, in turn, shared his own experiences, offering guidance, support, and insight. Together, they created an environment that was nurturing, productive, and filled with respect. The chief remained a guiding presence throughout this transformation. He observed quietly, offering counsel when necessary, but allowing the rancher and the women to build trust organically. His leadership was marked by wisdom and patience, demonstrating that true authority was earned through respect and integrity. The rancher learned that leadership was not about domination or control. It was about guiding with fairness, valuing others, and building relationships based on trust. By the end of this period, the rancher's perspective on life had shifted dramatically. He no longer saw the frontier as a place of solitude and struggle alone. He saw it as a space where human connection, generosity, and mutual respect could flourish. He understood that acts of kindness were not isolated. They carried consequences that could touch lives far beyond the moment. The rancher now viewed himself as part of a larger story, one in which compassion, courage, and trust could create harmony in even the most challenging circumstances. Life on the ranch had become a living example of cooperation and gratitude. The animals were cared for more effectively, the land was managed more skillfully, and the daily tasks were completed with efficiency and joy. But beyond the practical benefits, the rancher understood the deeper lesson, that relationships, empathy, and shared effort were the foundation of a meaningful life. The women's presence had taught him that true wealth was not measured in material possessions, but in the bonds of trust, respect, and shared humanity. As the sun set each evening, casting warm light across the plains, the rancher would often sit quietly, watching the women move through their tasks or listening to their stories around the fire. He felt gratitude, not only for the help they provided, but for the lessons they had imparted. He realized that life was richer when lived in harmony with others, and that the smallest acts of kindness could create waves that reached far beyond imagination. And so the rancher's life continued, transformed by trust, collaboration, and the quiet power of compassion. The ranch was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a place of learning, growth, and connection. The women had brought knowledge, grace, and resilience, and in return, the rancher offered guidance, respect, and friendship. Together, they created a harmony that neither could have achieved alone, a living testament to the power of kindness, courage, and shared humanity. The days on the ranch had grown brighter and fuller. The once quiet and lonely cabin now hummed with life, laughter, and shared work. The animals were well cared for, the garden was thriving, and the land felt alive in a way it never had before. The rancher moved through his days with a sense of purpose and calm that he had never known when he lived alone. Each morning brought a routine of work and learning. Each evening brought shared stories, and each night carried the quiet satisfaction of a life enriched by human connection. The presence of the Apache women and their chief had changed not only the rancher's life, but also the land itself. The fields were cultivated with greater care, the animals were calmer and healthier, and the routines were smoother and more efficient. Yet the most profound change was not in the ranch itself, it was in the rancher's heart. He had discovered the deep value of trust, gratitude, and collaboration. He had learned that generosity was not a one-time act, but a seed that, when nurtured, could grow into something far greater than expected. Word of the unusual alliance between the rancher and the Apache women began to spread in nearby towns and settlements. Travelers spoke of a ranch where settlers and Native Americans lived in harmony, working together, helping each other, and sharing knowledge. The story inspired curiosity, admiration, and sometimes disbelief. Many had never seen such a bond form across cultures, and the example of cooperation challenged old prejudices and fears. The rancher, however, paid little attention to the gossip. His focus was on the daily life of the ranch and the people who had become part of it, and he found that the work and connection brought him more fulfillment than any recognition ever could. The women continued to teach and share their wisdom. They showed the rancher new ways to preserve food, to understand the weather, and to live in harmony with the seasons. They spoke of rituals that honored the earth, stories that carried lessons of courage and patience, and ways of approaching challenges that required thoughtfulness and care. Each lesson was a reminder that life was not only about survival, but about understanding, respect, and balance. The rancher absorbed every lesson, grateful for the chance to grow as a person, as well as a caretaker of his land. The chief remained a steady presence, his guidance subtle yet powerful. He did not dominate or command, he observed, advised, and encouraged. The rancher came to understand that true leadership was not about asserting authority, but about inspiring trust, demonstrating fairness, and supporting those around you. In the chief's presence, the rancher learned the value of patience, listening, and acting with integrity. He realized that these were lessons he could carry not only on the ranch, but in all aspects of life. Over time, the bond between the rancher and the women became more than practical collaboration. It became a relationship of respect, friendship, and shared humanity. They laughed together during work, shared stories by the fire in the evenings, and celebrated small victories in the garden or with the animals. The rancher felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He was no longer alone. He was part of a community built on trust, gratitude, and mutual support. One day, the rancher received a message from the woman he had helped. She had been observing the land and the people from afar, ensuring that everything was safe before fully introducing the chief and the other women. Her words, spoken through gestures and translations, carried warmth and a reminder of the courage it had taken to seek help in the first place. The rancher realized that his simple act of giving his last loaf of bread had created a ripple of trust and gratitude that extended far beyond that single moment. It had connected him to people and a culture that he had previously only known from stories. As the weeks turned into months, the rancher and the women faced challenges together. Harsh weather, animal illnesses, and the occasional threat from the wild tested their patience and resilience. Yet, every obstacle was met with cooperation, problem-solving, and mutual support. The rancher had learned to trust not only his own abilities but the strength and knowledge of others. In return, the women had learned to trust him, to respect his experience, and to work alongside him as equals. These shared trials built bonds that were unbreakable, founded on respect, understanding, and shared effort. The surrounding community began to notice changes as well. Neighbors who once feared the Apache people began to see the potential for friendship and cooperation. The story of the rancher and the women spread, not as a tale of conflict, but as a testament to what could be achieved when humans acted with kindness and respect. Prejudices began to soften, and curiosity replaced suspicion. The rancher watched these changes quietly, understanding that the seeds of compassion could grow far beyond the boundaries of his own land. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and pinks, the chief approached the rancher. His expression was calm, yet there was a depth of meaning in his eyes. "You have shown that your heart is open," he said. "Your kindness has created more than you know. It has built trust, inspired respect, and reminded us all of what is possible when humans see the good in one another." The rancher nodded, humbled by the words. He understood that the gift of compassion was not only for the person who received it but for the person who gave it as well. He had acted without expectation, yet the rewards had been profound: friendship, understanding, and a connection that would last a lifetime. The women joined the conversation, sharing smiles and laughter. They expressed gratitude in small gestures, a woven cloth, a shared meal, or a simple nod of appreciation. Each gesture reinforced the bonds that had formed, showing that gratitude could be expressed in countless ways. The rancher felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had contributed to something meaningful, something that transcended cultural differences and personal expectations. As the days continued, the rancher reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He thought back to the night when the woman had appeared at his cabin, hungry and weary, and how he had given her the last loaf of bread without hesitation. He realized that life often presents opportunities to act with kindness, even when the cost seems high. In that single moment of generosity, he had unknowingly opened a door to a world of friendship, learning, and mutual respect. The rancher also recognized that this story was larger than himself. It was a story of humanity, of how simple actions could ripple outward and touch lives in ways unimaginable. The chief and the women had reminded him that compassion, honor, and courage were not limited by culture, language, or background. They were universal qualities, shared by all who were willing to act with integrity and heart. As the rancher walked through the fields one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and casting long shadows across the plains, he felt a sense of peace. The ranch was thriving, the animals were healthy, and the land was productive. But more importantly, the relationships he had built with the women and the chief had created a sense of community, trust, and belonging. He understood that life's true rewards were not measured in possessions, but in connection, understanding, and the simple power of human kindness. The story of the rancher and the Apache women became a quiet legend in the area. Travelers spoke of a place where trust, gratitude, and cooperation had bridged differences, created harmony, and transformed lives. For the rancher, however, the story was not about recognition. It was about the lessons learned, the friendships formed, and the understanding that a single act of generosity could change the course of many lives. In the final months of their stay, the bond between the rancher and the women reached its deepest point. They had faced challenges, celebrated successes, and shared countless quiet moments by the fire. The rancher had grown wiser, more patient, and more aware of the value of human connection. He understood that the trust and gratitude he had witnessed were not fleeting, they were lasting, built on actions, respect, and shared experience. When the time eventually came for the women and their chief to return to their community, there was a mixture of joy and sadness. The rancher had learned much from them, and their presence had transformed not only his land but his heart. They left with promises to visit again, with gifts of gratitude, and with a sense of mutual respect that could never be broken. The rancher watched them disappear into the horizon, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. As he returned to his daily routines, the rancher carried with him the lessons of trust, compassion, and courage. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he now understood that generosity and respect had the power to transform even the hardest circumstances. The simple act of giving his last loaf of bread had created ripples of kindness, connection, and harmony that would be remembered long after that moment had passed. And so, life on the ranch continued, richer, fuller, and brighter than ever before. The land, the animals, and the people who touched his life were all part of a story that proved the power of compassion. The rancher understood, finally, that kindness was never wasted, that trust could bridge worlds, and that the simplest actions could lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. In the end, he knew that life's true wealth was measured not by what one had, but by what one gave, and by the bonds of understanding and respect that one created along the way.